Hey, my name is Philip, and I'm the pastor here at GCC, and we're so glad that you're here. Can we just go ahead and say this, because there's some folks in the room, and I appreciate Dina so beautifully putting it, that we are sons and children of God, that whatever our earthly situation is, that we have that to celebrate. But I just want to say this out loud for some folks, because there are some dads that suck, okay? So we understand that this is a difficult day for you, and that's tough, and so here's my encouragement to that. If you had a dad either absent or just didn't handle this responsibilities well, don't continue to give him this day. Don't let this day bring you there. Celebrate this day and your father, seriously. This is so much more than the circumstances you came up under. And on another note, today's a tough day, because today may be a reminder that your dad is not here, or your grandfather's not here, and this may be the 1st or the 3rd or the 30th or whatever that is. I don't think that pain ever goes away. And so we want you to know that we love you, and we feel that. We step next to you, put our arm around you, and we want to love you in the midst of that. Happy Father's Day to all the guys. I wanted to say that myself. I'm the father of 4 beautiful children here on earth and 2 beautiful, children in heaven. So we're grateful. We're grateful for that privilege. It's something I always dreamed of, prayed for, even as a very weird elementary school child that made teachers nervous. So, but here I am, and I'm living the dream. I got 2 chairs this morning. What are those called? Adirondack something or other, but they're the plastic ones that stay outside, and you don't have to worry about them falling apart, to put out by my fire pit. I was really excited about that this morning. So, along with some very snazzy shorts that you may get to see at some point in time this summer. And they're like the shorter shorts, but on me they look like normal shorts. So I'm excited about that. I won't look like I'm in the 80s wearing jams. Anybody with me? Jams? Yeah, Mom made mine, so it was awesome. You don't want to miss next week. I'll just go ahead and say this. Next week we're going to conclude this series, and we're going to do that video live with me. I'm just kidding. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to cut my beard for any of you. But I do love talking about dads, because it is a big piece of our world. As a matter of fact, if you just scan history, this fatherhood thing seems to be a intertwined thread, if you will. It's in everything, and especially in the American culture, because all of the greatest movies have this father-son, father-child tension, this dynamic. And I've done some research, but I mean, you could name 10 or 12 probably that have that in them. I'll just go ahead and tell you some of the best ones. How about Back to the Future? You guys, Back to the Future? If you don't remember this movie, it's all about him going back to help his dad, right? And then his mom falling in love with him, which is a whole other thing that we're not going to get into. It's weird. But Back to the Future is all about a father and son. Catch Me If You Can. Have you seen this movie? Great movie. Frank Abagnale. It's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. It's fantastic. Not to mention it's Leo and Tom Hanks, so you can't go wrong. Another one is Field of Dreams. Good grief, Field of Dreams. This is like the father-son, if nothing else makes you cry, the end of this movie will make you cry. You stoic, stone-cold-hearted man, you. Phenomenal movie. I love Field of Dreams. Finding Nemo? Yeah? It's all about a father and son right there, right? A widower at that, so it's even a more beautiful picture there. The Godfather. Never asked me about my business. I'm kind of proud. Is that pretty good? Is that all right? Pretty good. I'm not going to say I did a voiceover for a series at a very large church in Charlotte, and they used my voiceover for a Godfather themed thing. So you can probably find that on the internet. The Lion King, right? Mufasa. Ooh, do it again. If you've never seen The Lion King in 3 seconds or 5 seconds, you need to search that this afternoon. Just go to Google, Lion King in 5 seconds, and then prepare to be sad. It's the funniest, most terrifying thing I've ever seen. And then the mother of them all, Star Wars. I mean, does it get any better than that scene, which apparently was done improperly when they filmed it, but turned out better. Just the Luke and Vader dynamic, the father-son thing, and it is great. It's launched, I don't even know how many movies now. I've yet to see Solo, but I'm planning to go see it. 7? Thank you. 8? Okay, we get approval back there from your My 7th grade daughter apparently knows all about it. But when I think about fathers and sons, I go to one story in history, which I think is possibly the most powerful, saddest story in the history of the world. And that is the story of David and his son Absalom. And if you don't know the story, you need to know the story. It's in the Bible, and you should read it. King David, this is David and Goliath, David and his son Absalom had this incredible story that I'm going to briefly summarize for you, hopefully. But many people don't know the story. We know David and Goliath when he was a boy. We know David and Saul. And then we know David and Solomon, right? Even David and Bathsheba we know. But not a lot of us know the story of David and Absalom. And I would argue that this is possibly the most telling story about David's character that exists in the pages of Scripture. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing because actually this story is in 2 Samuel chapters 13 through 18. And I would love to sit here and read that and walk through it with you. I don't think you would love to do that. So you should read this on your own, but I'm going to summarize it for you, okay? So in 13, this situation happens where David has multiple wives and he has children by all of them, and some of them are full blood brother and sister, some of them are half. But there's this one daughter of his, and her name is Tamar, and she's beautiful, and she's young, and she's a virgin, and she has this full-blooded brother, Absalom. They're brother and sister, but then she has this half-blood brother, this half-sister, whose name is Amnon. And Amnon, and go with me here because this is so weird, falls in love with Tamar. Okay, he's just over the moon. As a matter of fact, Scripture tells us he makes himself ill with how much he's in love with her. And his buddy, his high-quality friend, comes to him and says, "Dude, what's your problem? Why are you all looking like you're grieving all the time?" He's like, "What am I supposed to do? I'm in love with my sister." And at that point, the friend should have said, right there, and left. Okay? But what his friend does, his sketchy friend says, "Well, here's what you got to do, man. Here's how you get in bed with your sister." What? So he devises this whole plan where he acts like he's ill, and he asks his dad to send his sister to bring food, and then he sends everyone out of the room so that he can eat the food in peace and quiet, and then he rapes his sister, Tamar. Amnon rapes Tamar. And then the Bible tells us that as soon as the act is over, that he is filled with more hate for her than love he had for her. Which is, you've been there. It's shame, it's guilt, it's sin that overcomes him, and that her presence in his bedroom reminds him of how filthy he is and how sinful he is. And so he's filled with this hate to the point that he kicks her out. And she begs him not to kick him out because the thing that he's done is so disrespectful and dishonorable. But to kick her out after that would be even worse. And so he does. And she literally is walking through the streets of the kingdom, and she's torn her dress. She has ash on her head. She's mourning and weeping. And along comes Absalom, her brother. And he says, "What happened, sister?" And he takes her in, and she lives with him. And nothing happens for 2 years. King David the warrior, King David, a man after God's own heart, finds out that this happened and gets angry and does nothing. So Absalom, 2 years later, devises his own plan. And he throws a party for sheep shearing, like you and I do. And he invites his dad and everybody, and his dad's like, no, if we all came, it'd be too much for you, we don't want to impose. And he says, okay, well, at least send Amnon and my brothers. At least send Amnon, if no one else, to help me with the sheep shearing. And so David sends Amnon and all his other sons to this party, at which Absalom has concocted a plan that he's going to get him drunk. And he tells one of his servants that when you see Amnon marry with wine, strike him dead. And don't worry, because I've commanded you, and you have to do what I tell you to. Because when the prince tells you to do something, you do it, or you die. And so he does just that. At the right moment, Absalom commands, and the servant kills Amnon right there in the sight of all the other siblings. At that point, the other siblings do what you would do. They get on their mules and literally hightail it out of there. But message gets back to David that all of his children have been slaughtered. And he's overcome with grief. His advisor says, I don't think that's the case. Let's just wait and see. And turns out, of course, only Amnon has been killed. But Absalom flees. Because Absalom knows that it's one thing to do something to a daughter, but it's a whole other thing to kill the son of the king, even when you are a son of the king. So Absalom leaves and goes to a place called Geshur and lives there for 3 years. We're now 5 years removed from this situation between Tamar and Amnon. At this point, David is sick and longs to see his son Absalom. And he's miserable, and his advisor notices. And so Joab, David's advisor, concocts this plan. I don't know why these guys can't just communicate. It's not a problem we have today, is it, gentlemen? But his advisor concocts this plan, brings this woman in to set up this whole scenario, and David pronounces judgment on the scenario, and then she says, well, sir, actually, it's you. And David goes, did Joab put you up to this? Literally, this is in the Bible. He said, did Joab put you up to this? And she's like, yes, sir. And so David commands Joab to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem. But here's the thing. He doesn't come into David's house. As a matter of fact, he doesn't come into David's presence for 2 years. And Absalom gets frustrated with this. It's one thing to be in Geshur and be isolated and have fled and be exiled. It's another thing to be down the street and your father refuses to see you. And so Absalom becomes sick with this. He requests to see the king, king won't see him. He requests to see Joab, Joab won't see him. And so, like any mature adult, Joab concocts a plan that Joab has to come and talk to him. And here's the plan. Absalom notices that Joab's field of barley is next to his field. And so he tells his servants, go set Joab's field on fire. So he has to come, like you do with your neighbor, right? And so he literally sets his field on fire, and Joab comes running in, and he's like, what did you do? He's like, well, you wouldn't come see me. Are you a 16-year-old girl? What's your problem? Right? He says, I want to see my dad. And so Joab he talks to David. David had longed to see Absalom. Now Absalom longs to see David. All this stuff has transpired, and so here we are, that finally Absalom comes into the king's presence. And here is the moment it happens. In verse 33 of chapter 14 of 2 Samuel, then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. So he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. And the king kissed Absalom. This is the last time. This is the last time that David will see his son alive. Because what transpires next is that Absalom puts himself in a position to win the hearts of the people of Jerusalem. He sits at the gate and talks to people who can't get an audience with the king and says, you know what I would do if I were in charge? You've seen that guy. Maybe you've even been that guy before. If I were in charge of this office, things would be different. If I were in charge of this church, maybe things would be different. We would have Sunday school. Right? And so that's what Absalom does. He sits himself at the gates of the city where everybody sees him and everybody knows who he is. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us that Absalom is good looking, which is why you should never trust a good looking person. That's why I'm grateful that God made me the way I am. It says that he's tall. Don't trust tall people. Especially tall, good-looking people with good hair. The Bible tells us he had beautiful hair that he would cut once a year and they would weigh it. Like that's an event in this city that, Absalom's getting his hair cut. I wonder how much it's going to weigh. I'll put down some money on it, right? And so he's a beautiful, tall man with beautiful hair that everybody loves, and he sits himself in a position to tell people, if I were in charge, here's what I'd do. And after some time, the people of Jerusalem, their hearts go to Absalom. And he knows it. And he starts to win a following. And so he goes to a place called Hebron, and he tells people, he says, when you hear the trumpet blow, declare Absalom is king. And so he essentially creates a coup of his dad's throne. Now David knows this is going on. Joab knows this is going on. They see all this is going on. And instead of stepping in and speaking to his son, instead of walking down the street and talking to him, David fears that this new rebellion, this army that Absalom has created is going to come in and is going to slaughter people. And so David, at this point in his life, decides, I'm just going to leave. And he gathers up his people, and he leaves his own town, his own kingdom, for fear of their lives. Absalom comes in and essentially takes the throne. And this battle ensues later on, where Absalom is out with the people. They're trying to chase David down and surprise him and kill him to completely squash the kingdom and take over completely. And there's this servant who sees Absalom. Now remember the pretty hair? This is incredible. You should read the Bible. It's really good. Absalom apparently is riding along on his horse or mule or whatever, and his hair gets caught in the branches of a tree, and his animal just keeps on. And so he's literally hanging there from his hair in the tree. Like, ha ha ha, pretty man with the hair. I'm balding. It's not going to happen to me. Right? And so Absalom is literally hanging there by his hair, and a servant of Joab sees it and says, Joab needs to know. And he goes and tells him, and Joab's like, what? Why didn't you kill him? He's like, I ain't killing the son's king. That's why we got in this mess in the first, or king's son. That's how we got in this mess in the first place. And so Joab goes and he kills Absalom. And the rebellion is done. And David and his people retake the throne. But David is crushed. He's miserable. As a matter of fact, David says, I wish it were me. And for whatever inadequacies and whatever areas that David failed as a father, I think that is a common thing for dads of any spectrum. That if we could, we would save our children pain. If we could take their place, we would. I think that's why the sacrifice of Jesus is so painful when you read it in Scripture. And for us, God's children, he gave of himself. He literally took our place. What's incredible about this story is it reminds me that every earthly relationship is going to end. Back in chapter 14, David and Absalom had no idea that was the last time that they would interact. David had no idea that it was the last time he would kiss his son. Absalom had no idea it was the last time he would see his father. The reality is that all of us have relationships, whether good or bad, and they will all end. Every earthly relationship will end. The question is, how do you want it to end? I've got some relationships that I want to end differently than they would if they ended today. And I've got some work to do. But just for a moment, I'd like to imagine what might have happened differently if David had decided it was worth the awkwardness and the pain and the messiness if he'd have spoken into the mess of life that his children had made. Well, what could have been avoided if in the horrendously tragic scenario of Amnon and Tamar, if David had just stepped in and sent sent Amnon to prison for a while? How many lives could have been saved? How much turmoil could have been avoided? And they just stepped into the awkwardness of that situation. And even after Absalom kills Amnon, if David had stepped into the awkwardness and the pain and the tragedy of that situation and pronounced judgment and gave context and boundaries and corrected, what could have been saved? But he doesn't. His inaction caused irreparable harm to more than just himself and his child. It was multiplied person after person. And I can't help but wonder what it would look like if fathers today, gentlemen who are dads, if you and I would just decide that it was worth the awkwardness and the risk of rejection and the embarrassment to pursue a relationship with our children. You know, my kids are getting into the teen years, and my sons are still, think I'm Superman, but they won't one day. My daughters, no, I'm not. But I'm just not willing to sit by I'm going to press into the awkwardness. I'm going to press into the mess. I'm going to step into when they've made mistakes. I'm going to apologize when I make mistakes, which is often. Because for me, it's worth it. And I hope you see that it's worth it. It's important. And what I think is beautiful is that years later, one of David's sons, possibly the most famous son of all, Solomon, he writes something about parenthood in the Psalms. And I want you to see this. This is Psalm 127, verses 3 and 4. And it says, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth." Solomon knows these stories. Solomon possibly lived through them. I didn't do the research to know where he was in the whole thing with his age, or that he knows them. And he's writing things like this. The idea of children being an arrow. And so, what do we do with arrows? That's the question I ask. I'm not going to shoot this, don't worry. I'm not that dumb, white, and evangelical to actually use a weapon in a church service today. But I do enjoy bow and arrow. I don't bow hunt because I don't like bugs. Just being honest. But I enjoy shooting. We took our staff earlier this year to a place and shot, and my wife beat all of us, by the way. She's a crack shot. We had a crack of time with it, and Randy wasn't so bad herself. I think the girls destroyed us. But I love it. I do. I enjoy it. And so as I read that passage from Solomon, and he says that children are like arrows, the question I ask is, well, what do we do with arrows? And if you don't have any familiarity with shooting a bow or an arrow, I'll tell you, there's essentially three things we do with an arrow. It's that first one is, well, here are the three things. We prepare them, we aim them, and we release them. And if children are like arrows in the hand of a warrior, then that's a pretty simple thing for us, right? To prepare them, to aim them, and release them. And so the thought I have is, well, what does it mean to prepare as a father? If children are like an arrow, what does it mean to prepare the arrow, right? And I think it's real simple. It's to love them. You know, when you prepare an arrow, you make sure that these guys are right, and you're able to knock it, and you got the right tip on the arrow, and there's no fractures in there. And so the way that we prepare our children for life is that we help them, we love them well. And I would argue that one of the best ways we can love our children is to love their mother. And I hope and I pray that relationship is still intact. It's clearly better for children when a father and a mother are in the home loving each other. But even if that's not the case, you have an opportunity, gentlemen, to love your children's mother well, whether she deserves it or not. And it's better for your children when you do treat her well. But we do have to love them as well. We have to care for them. We have to correct. We have to know when something's amiss and when something needs to be corrected or replaced. When we need to step in and make a correction. When we need to prepare the tip differently, right? When they're maybe not prepared for a certain situation, we need to change it for them. We love them. We provide for them. Scripture is clear that if a man isn't taking care of his own house, he has no business taking care of anything else in the world. And I'm not saying that you've got to provide every blasted electronic device they want, but you need to provide for your children. More than just the basic, they have a t-shirt and shorts and a roof to sleep under. I mean, you need to provide for them. Care well for them. Because when we provide for our children and we're taking care of our own finances, we're setting them up, we're preparing them up for life. It's one of my hopes, I don't know if it's going to work out with this whole church planting thing, it's one of my hopes that my children don't have to take on student debt when they go to college. And that I can help in that process some way. Now that's only 4 years away for our first, and so I'm telling my kids, scholarship, right? That's how I'm helping prepare them. But I'm also trying to get my finances in order so that I can help provide for that in some way, shape, or form. So that's how we prepare them. And we aim the arrow, right? When we place it on the bow, we aim the arrow. Now, if you don't know, you don't just aim the tip or whatever. You have to consider the elevation, and you have to consider where the entire arrow is. You actually have to make sure that these guys are not going to clip the bow itself. You have to do all kinds of things as you aim the arrow. And as we think about that with our children, there's only so much we can do to aim their lives. But for one thing we can do in terms of aiming their life in the right direction is engaging in their life. And some of us are really good at that when they're interested in things we're interested in. Right? If they like tech stuff, then it's easy to engage with them in the tech stuff. If they like athletics, it's easy to engage with them in athletics. But when our interests are different, that's when it gets a little harder. Or maybe even when they're younger, it's difficult for us to engage at their level. But I argue that sometimes we just need to get on the floor and play with them. We've said this before. I heard it from Matt Chandler that when you get home from work, there's a temptation, gentlemen, because you've worked hard. You've had to put up with all those idiots in your office and dealt with all the drama there, right? So much drama. And your temptation is to be like, I deserve to sit in my chair and have a beverage and watch some TV and just chill. I need that so that I can be sane the rest of my life. But the reality is that when we're sitting in that driveway, we need to mentally remind ourselves that right now we're clocking into the most important job we have. We need to walk in and wrestle with our sons. We need to walk in and train with our daughters. And listen, I'm right there with you. I office at home, and it's hard. I'll hopefully get my office back this week, but it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying I do it well. But we have to engage in their life. We need to play at their level. We need to be interested in the things they're interested in. And as we are doing that, we're actually helping point them in the direction they should go. We need to set an example so they have something to aim at. Are you living a life that demonstrates that you trust and love the Lord? Are you living a life that if they were to literally point their arrows where you're pointing your arrow, that you'd be pleased with their life? Are you valuing the things in your own life that you hope your children value in theirs? Are you setting an example for them? And then finally, we release them, right? We pull back the bow and we release the arrow. And what that looks like for us is we help them discover life. At some point, they're going to drive that car out of the driveway by themselves. At some point, they're going to go off to college and make decisions without us. And we have to help them in that discovery. We're done with the instruction at some level. We have to release them to experience that on their own. They need to experience what it's like to make bad decisions with money and feel the consequences of it. They need to experience what it's like to make a poor decision in trusting a friend and feel the weight of that pain and know to correct it on their own. We help them discover life, and then we encourage them as they are in life. Not just pointing out all the things they should have done, but encourage them. Hey, I know that sucked. Probably could have done it differently. Probably would do it differently if you had it to do over, but I'm proud of you. Man, gentlemen, I hope you understand the impact of your words to your sons and daughters when you say, I'm proud of you. It's massive. My daughters will know that I love them. My sons will know that I'm proud of them. Encouragement. The conference we went to a couple of months ago that I referenced last week had this to say about the arrow and children illustration. It said this: an arrow on the bow is intended to be released. We control the tension and plan for a destination, but the arrow lands where it's launched. Error increases with distance. And I think that's what I see in David's life, is he distanced himself from the situations in his children's life, and error was far more likely to happen. And there's a temptation, gentlemen, as our children grow older, that we we feel like, well, I've just got to step back a little bit. No. I saw this for years in student ministry. I see it now in my own life. When our children become teenagers and adolescents and they start moving into adulthood, it's time for us to step in differently, but step in closer, not back out. You see, fathers almost never recognize the damage inaction brings. We almost never recognize the damage inaction brings. I don't think David could recognize the damage he was doing to his family, the lives in his city, with his inaction. We often know that when we're doing something intentionally that it's going to matter, that we're going to see it was helpful later on. We know that intentionality leads to good things, but we don't recognize that inaction leads to almost always negative things. So that should prompt us to be intentional. Because the reality is this, for the rest of us who aren't fathers, who aren't even men, the reality is that fathers impact us all, whether intentionally, unintentionally, or absently. It may not have been your father, but it may be the father of your significant other. It may have been your grandfather. Intentionally, unintentionally, or absently, the action of fathers or inaction of fathers impacts us all. And I think our response to that impact, our evaluation of our fathers, of our grandfathers, of us as fathers, our evaluation and our response to it, it's either going to lead to excuse or it's going to lead to inspiration. We're going to look at our fathers and how they lived. We're going to look at ourselves and how we're parenting, and we're either going to make excuses or it's going to inspire us to do more or better. And I think as we look at that, I hope that all of us will choose inspiration. Regardless of what kind of dad you had, I pray that it inspires you to be better, to be more intentional. Maybe even just with a kid who doesn't have a dad in his life. That you'll get involved in Grace Kids, that you'll get involved in GCS, that you'll get involved in mentoring in our city, that you'll get involved in their schools. That your I wish my dad had done blank will inspire you to be a person of influence in a child's life. Whether you're a guy or a girl, or married or single. And I hope that you and I will be able to make peace with the fathers that we did have. And peace doesn't always mean, we're holding hands walking down the garden valley. But just peace means it's not dragging us down all the time. That we're able to trust that God is greater and He has greater things in store. My hope is this, gentlemen who are dads, that you and I will be the fathers that our wives dreamed of, that our children deserved, and that our Father in heaven created us to be. It's not easy. We're not going to get it right all the time. But I would be willing to bet that anybody who had a dad who was absent would much prefer an imperfect father than an absent father. And anybody who had a dad who didn't get it right all the time would prefer to have a dad who was at least trying and not getting it right versus a dad who was just, I don't know. Let me pray for us. God, you are holy and perfect and wonderful and beautiful. And we thank you for the sacrifices you made for us. We thank you for preparing us, for aiming us and releasing us, walking beside us, for catching us when we fall, loving us when we fail. Lord, I pray for all the fathers that we would aspire to be men that our wives dreamed of, that our children deserve, and that you created us to be. Help us to choose inspiration over excuse. Help us to wear out at the end of life rather than rust out. Thank you that there are examples, maybe not in our own homes, but there are examples of great men, of great character, who care well for people that we can look to for guidance. Now, Lord, help us. Give us strength. Give us courage. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.